Bassmaster Elite. Well, yep, Bassmaster Elite Pro, William Davis Jr., Matty Wong, Pat Schlopper, Justin Hamner, and then we got MLF Pro Greg Vinson, and National Professional League Mr. John Cox, all sitting down for this one. So we'll be getting started here in just a few minutes. Fast forward if you're watching this down the line, and yeah, I think this is going to be a good one.
All right, everybody, welcome to our Bass Ace Seminar Q&A panel again. Again, if you have any questions about how to make yourself a better bass angler, anything about technology, anything about any particular to bass fishing or even these guys in their careers, let me introduce you to our panel. We have Greg Vinson from Wetumpka, Alabama. Greg is a long-time tenured tournament professional. He has fished for how many years now, professionally? 15 years. He is qualified for 4 Bassmaster Classics. He's qualified for 3 Red Crest Championships. He has finished second in the Bassmaster Classic. He's well over $1 million in his career. We've got the last 3 Bass Nation champions here. If you follow the Federation-style tournaments, the last 3 of them, we've got Pat Schlopper from 2020. He's from Wisconsin, Elite Series Pro. We've got Matty Wong over here from 2021. He's actually from Hawaii. This guy's got some of the most interesting life stories, including free diving. The man, what's your depth? 80 feet on one breath, down and back. He's a surfer. Hang loose, brah. We've got the 2022 Bass Nation Championship from Sylacauga, Alabama. We've got Will Davis over here. And then we've got John Cox, an NPFL pro. He actually led the first day of the first NPFL tournament on Lake Eufaula. He's from the Rome, Georgia area. He's also a plumber. He owns a plumbing company. So if you guys want to talk about anything, how to fix it at your house, wait till later because we're not going to talk about that today. Greg, it looks like you might have a client over there, John. Yeah. He loves plumbing. I've seen all his posts. Anyway, you've got an esteemed group of anglers here. They do this for a living. They know what they're talking about. They've all won doing it. So let's start with, anybody have a first question about anything, or do you want me to kind of pick a theme and we go from there? Go ahead, sir.
What's y'all's favorite technique to catch your limit and what pound line?
Okay, the question here from the gentleman is, what's your favorite technique for catching a limit and what pound line do you usually start with that? So we'll go ahead and pass these microphones back and forth. Pat, let's start with you.
I'd say
you can.
I gotta pick it up.
You pick it up.
Sorry,
Pass it.
a first timer here.
He's a first timer. He's never done a seminar before. Just kidding.
I guess for me, if I had to pick a bait or a technique in general for getting bites, it's going to be a drop shot, whether it's smallmouth, largemouth, spotted bass. A lot of the fish that I've weighed in this year on the Elite Series so far have been on a drop shot. So, and I like using braid, 12-pound braid, typically an 8-pound Sunline FC Sniper fluorocarbon leader. And then either like a big bite, cliffhanger worm, or lately I've been just nose hooking a lot of small plastics. So drop shot gets bit anywhere that I've ever been, any species, and it catches big ones too. So that'd be my choice.
John, what about you?
I personally like to go power fishing, so I would use chatterbait, swim bait, spinner bait, or a jig. So I'm usually a shallow water angler, 20 pound, 17, 20 pound fluorocarbon, 7.3, usually a medium heavy rod, and that's my go-to to catch. If they'll bite any of that, I'm good.
Maddie, what about you?
I'm going to have to side with Pat. Finesse, for the most part, across the country will get the most bites. If you're just trying to catch a limit, try to put fish in the boat. I love power fishing, but it doesn't always work out, and I end up like eating my chatterbait instead of like a bass eating it. So I'd usually like to go finesse style, drop shot, Neko rig, or wacky, and it's kind of hard to beat. 8-pound, 10-pound FC Sniper leader by Sunline is basically all I got in my box. And it really depends.
Question to add to that was, what leader knot do you use when you're going braid to fluorocarbon?
So if I have time, FC, like the FG knot is a great knot to use. But then if you're in a pinch and you need to throw it together really quick, the Albright knot is really, really hard to beat, and it's really strong. So I don't like Uni or blood knots just because of the size of the knot itself. But if you use an Albright knot or an FG knot, I feel it goes through the guides really well. And typically you don't need more than a 6-foot leader. So,
Greg, why don't you grab that other microphone there, and we'll start with you for this question.
Yeah, so a normal answer over the years probably would have been like a small profile jig. I can do a lot of different things with that, get a lot of different bites, catch some big fish. But if I'm looking at my career and what's really saved me in a lot of cases is it's been a jerkbait. You know, over the years, I threw it a lot of times, a lot of places where other people didn't, something I could cover water. In the last few years with forward sonar, that's completely changed the game. So a lot more people throwing jerkbaits now because they're able to search with forward sonar. But now I can fish it around cover that is underwater that I couldn't see with my eyes, you know, using forward sonar. So I'm more efficient than I was. And it's just one of those things. It's like we probably all have that thing that when we're struggling, we got to go to that thing we got confidence in to generate a bite. For me, generally like a, you know, a smaller profile jerkbait if I'm just trying to get bites. And then if I want to catch bigger ones, we'll work up from there. 12-pound, I use 12-pound Tatsu, cigar Tatsu, real supple. You can cast the snot out of it, get real good bait action. If I get around heavy cover, I might go to 15, but I don't go any higher than 15.
Will, what about you?
My favorite thing is probably dynamite. You know, that's the best thing to use. If they ain't biting, you know, if they ain't biting, you just throw a stick out there, you know. But no, I'm a power fisherman. I like cranking, deep cranking, shallow cranking, chatterbait type deal. You know, I throw that chatterbait and crankbaits on 15-pound test, red label, cigar, on a 7-1 medium heavy MMA rod with a Daiwa 7-3 ratio. But that setup right there is cashed me a few checks this year already on the Elite Series. So.
What's next? Any other questions? We got the starting point. Who wants to ask the follow-up questions? All right. So now you're looking for your kicker, Pat. Let's go with you. You got your limit in the boat. Let's say it's 14, 15 pounds on a really good lake like you've been fishing the last few. What's going to be the next approach?
Depending on the time of year, but for me, generally bigger bites, I'm going to flip a jig. It's going to be a half-ounce lock and load jig, one that I designed, typically a big bite chunk. Or I personally, in cold water, still like the old school Uncle Josh pork. I caught a 10-pound 5-ouncer on Chickamauga last year in the Elite Series on that. Just something when I put it in my hand, if I get a bite, I feel like it's going to be big. So it would definitely be a jig for me for bigger bites.
All right, John, what about you?
Mine's going to be the same thing, except for I don't never use one of Pat's jigs, so it's going to be a 2kjigs.com. 2K custom kicker jigs is going to be my go-to.
Maddie, I have a feeling it's going to look like the size of a tennis shoe.
Yeah, either a tennis shoe or a size 12 flipper. Yeah, I think you could probably fry up some of these and be the same size as a crappie. Yeah, I would go with the Mega Bass Mag Draft, 6 or 8 inch. Hands down, I've caught more fish during a tournament that are 6 to 8 pounds on a 6-inch mag draft and an 8-inch mag draft than anything else. And also a glide. I almost won Havasu on a glide fishing for smallmouth, and that was with an 8-inch glide bait, and I was catching 4.5-pound smallmouth. So when everyone else was bringing in 10 pounds, I brought an 18-pound bag. And they're like, how'd you do that? And I'm like, well, they ate a thing that you all thought that they weren't going to eat. So don't be afraid to upsize.
They ate the thing they were catching. They were catching the same size you were throwing.
Yeah, basically. So, yeah, I would go to swim baits. It's just, I love throwing big glide baits, and yeah, mag drafts are basically my bread and butter. 16-pound test for the 6-inch. When you bump up to the 8-inch, I would go 20-pound. Depends if you're fishing it around cover. And then I would say sunline shooter, when you have a higher abrasion resistance, there's not so much stretch in that type of line. And then depending on the size of the glide that you're fishing and the type of cover and whatnot, it can go from 16-pound test all the way up to 25. So when I'm throwing a $1,000 bait out there, I want a 25-pound.
He's not joking.
And I'm not kidding.
He's not joking. But just not to hijack this question, there's some custom glide baits up there, the Eon glides up there from Tato Designs that are quite literally for tournament fishing or just everyday fishing. They're 2-pounders being caught on it out there. Legitimately on Neely Henry. They're up there. We've also got a good selection of mag drafts. If you want to talk to a swim bait guy, him or Brandon Polinick, take them aside, learn how to throw them, and don't be intimidated by a swim bait. Most people look at them and go, oh my gosh, that thing is giant. Hold up a 6-inch swim bait next to a Super Spook. They are exactly the same size, and you all throw them. So if you want to try to catch bigger fish, talk to Matty. He'll give you a bunch of pointers on it. These guys all throw them, but I know he lives on them. Greg, what about you? What's next?
I'm a jig guy. You know, I need a big bite. I go to a jig, half ounce. I like a half ounce. I can cover more water. Even if it's shallow, I can pitch it in thick cover. Net bait, you know, I like the 4-inch Paca Slim. It's got a solid body, so I can adjust the length of that trailer hanging off the jig. Or the mini kicking bait. There's 2 different actions out of those trailers. But for me, one of those 2, that's how it gets big bites around here on the Coosa River. Even Lake Martin, you know, there's not a lot of big fish in there. When I need a big one, I put a big jig on there, and I go for that one big bite. So even Alabama River, you know, same thing. You're in Alabama, big jig, get a little action on that trailer, you can get a big bite, big spots and largemouth.
Little Will, dynamite's been taken already, so you can't use that now.
Yeah.
What's your big bite go
I'm
to?
kind of old school. I like throwing a spook, even in the middle of the day, 1 o'clock, sun high, you know, 50-pound braid or 30-pound braid on a 7.3 medium heavy MMA rods, you know, just over stumps and stuff. You know, I catch a lot of big ones, and most time when they come up, they get it. You know, they don't mess around with it. You know, in the morning time, you have a lot more bites doing that, but you don't catch near as many good ones. Just a lot of rats, you know. And then I'm with Greg on the jig deal. I like flipping and skipping and hopping and everything, you know, with the jig. Davis wood jig with a fighting frog on it. That's my go-to bait on the structure deal.
So you three, well, 4 of you guys are, I like big bugs, and I cannot lie. That's what it is, right? All right. Somebody shoot me a question. Anything. No such thing as dumb questions around here unless I ask them. So the question is what is he using to puncture and pre-drill his Uncle Josh with?
They'll have a pre-punched hole. Like I haven't bought any of the new ones. I don't know if the new ones are pre-punctured or not, but when they were going before I started fishing, I bought and sold tackle for 20 years. So I would kind of get the inside scoop on when stuff was going out. And so I called down to Uncle Josh, which is in Wisconsin, and I said, send me all the number 11 black and blue and blacks that you have and number ones. So I have a big stockpile of the old ones, and they have a pre-punched hole. So, you know, once you kind of work it in there, it's on there till you take it off. And to take it off, you kind of got to flip it backwards and twist it a little bit. I mean, it's really simple for me to do it, but, you know, if you haven't done it before, they can be a pain to get off. But if the new ones don't, I'd be shocked if the new ones didn't have a pre-punched hole. But if you didn't go through that, you're probably not getting it off there.
So it's if you look at it, it's kind of the hole is kind of this way. So if you put them on, but if you turn it sideways, the hole is kind of elongated that way, so that you can kind of just slide it off. I myself love pork. I'm a believer, you know, the colors on soft plastics are great, but I do think on pork, the fish take the bait deeper. So a lot of these times when you hear people saying they're losing jig fish, my theory on it is, with plastic, they're keeping it out closer to the edge of their mouth so much. With pork, they take it in and they hold it deeper, is what my theory is, because they're hooked deeper.
Well, and it's natural material. You know, it's fat and skin, and it's real thin cut on the legs, so that when that jig hits the bottom and the skirt flares, that chunk just floats up. And the one thing I'll tell you, what I think a lot of people do wrong with that is, you know, you're hooking it through that pre-punctured hole, but what can happen, especially if you're skipping it, is that pork will get twisted around and it'll get caught up on the hook. So I take a little chunk of like a Senko, and my jig's got a screw lock on it, so I'll thread it on, just like probably a 3/4 of an inch, and put it up, you know, towards the skirt on the shank of the hook, and that'll really help reduce that pork from balling up. But yeah, pork is just, when I told them at Chickamauga that I caught that on a pork frog, the media people, they're like, well, where did you get that? You know, nobody believed me because nobody throws it anymore. And that's why what I think is part of the magic of it is, if the water's under 55 degrees, that's what I got on my jig, bottom line.
I have a stockpile of pork too. It's super pork from the West Coast, something that I've kept for many, many years. You can also dye pork if you want to. You can run it through a process and use RIT dye, and you can color pork if you want to. Okay, any other questions here? Yes, buddy. Say that again. What's the question here from the young man is, what's your favorite colors to use in soft plastics? Let's start with soft plastics. between stained and clear.
Black,
Maybe one.
black, blue, green pumpkin, watermelon red, or variations of that. And then I really like the, like Strike King calls it a blue craw, or like a tilapia from Big Bite. I mean, I've got thousands of colors, but it seems like in a tournament, it's always one of them, or a variation of it. So you don't need to go crazy on all the new colors, in my opinion. You know, black, blue, green pumpkin, that's watermelon red, watermelon. That'll get you covered.
John, what about you?
Yeah, listen to your dad, black and blue, green pumpkin.
Yeah, simple as that, man. I mean, I'm going to agree. And you're probably going to hear the same thing along the board. I mean, the more that you try to complicate things, you give yourself more options to go down a weird rabbit hole. And when you go down that rabbit hole, you're not thinking about what the bait that you're fishing in and how you're effectively fishing it. You're thinking about, should they be eating this? Or would they be eating that? And you're not thinking about that one laydown that you're fishing, that there's a 5-pounder sitting underneath it waiting to bite that green pumpkin jig or whatever you want to throw. But just find a couple of those like simple staple ones and stick with it. Green pumpkin, black and blue if it's super dark, and just depending on what you're throwing as well. But bone white, but we're not talking about swim baits, so I'll pass it on.
Greg, what about you?
Definitely like your plastics. Hard to go wrong with the black, blue, and green pumpkin. You know, sometimes I like a little flake in there, so the tilapia magic is one that I really like. I'll add a little chartreuse a lot of times, especially around here and around the house. But you're talking about like some swim bait plastics now. You want to get something really natural. One of my favorites called albino. It's kind of a translucent white. It works all over the place around here. So, you know, it depends on what type of bait and what you're trying to imitate. But keep that in mind when you're using, you know, baits up in surface that look like minnows. That albino is a good color.
Little Will?
Probably black and blue is probably my favorite color, you know, early in the year. And as spring progresses, I like a green pumpkin. And then after that, in the hot summer months in Alabama, I like a red bug and a plum worm. That's probably my 4 go-to throughout the year.
And I help sell tackle, so I'm going to tell you that every color matters. No, just kidding. And I come from the West Coast where I've seen flake make a difference, so I'm a little goofy about that. My tackle wall at home is about 30 feet long, and my wife goes, "Oh my gosh, do you need all this stuff?" Probably not, but no, they're right. You can get by with simple. Here's the quote: You'll catch more fish with the wrong thing in the right place than you will the right thing in the wrong place. Location makes the most important choice, and then what you're comfortable with is another thing to add. All right, who's got another question? Okay, I'll come up with one. What made you decide to become a professional angler? Pat, let's start with you again.
So for me, it's something I've always wanted to do since I was his age. But, you know, I was 37 when I quit my job and decided to do it. So that's old in bass fisherman age, right? Well, no, I was 37 and I had a really good job, making good money. Like if I'd have stuck with that job, you know, by the time I was 50, I could have been retired and had more money than I could ever spend. But it was something I always wanted to do. And as you get older, once again, this is my opinion, you start to prioritize different things. And when I was younger, money was the priority. And as I got older, that wasn't as much of a priority as doing something that I've always wanted to do. So when I decided to quit to do it, I called my dad. He said to go do it. I talked to my wife. She said, "Yep, you should do it." And completely quit my job, fished the Opens, and fished the nation championship. Won the nation championship and qualified through the Opens in my first year. And now this is my 3rd year on the Elite Series. So I think I made the right decision. Ask me in 10 years, we'll see if I made the right decision. But as for right now, I think I did, and I won't have that regret of being someone that got to retirement age, which I think retirement is the biggest fallacy in the world. I didn't want to be that guy that got to that age and said, "I wish I would have did it." So even if I would have failed, I tried, but I didn't fail, and I'm here talking to you guys now. So.
What about you, John? I mean, you've got a couple of companies. You're a realtor. You're a plumber. You got great life, great business. But this is a dream. And what made you make that leap to go fish the NPFL?
So mine, like most of you, was an addiction more than a choice. And to me, just being my stage of life, I've only been professionally fishing for about 4 years now. But as most of you, I started out fishing weekend club tournaments, and you just get to a certain point where when you don't get the jitters before takeoff, you know, that chance of winning a $300 check at the end of Saturday after fishing 8 hours hard, if it's not doing it for you, you got to go to the next level. So I just started fishing regionally and then started traveling more. And then it's kind of like a gambler, I guess. You just got to go high stakes. So higher entry fees, higher payouts. Obviously, I could not make a living with my winnings. I make a living through my businesses, and you know, was fortunate enough to have my career done before I started fishing. So definitely don't do it for a living.
So I know Matty's story a little bit. We've had spent some time in the cars when he's been traveling. He kind of stops by here every once in a while, and his story is really, really unique. Everybody's got their own story, but his story is really unique, and his professional fishing hit like a freight train. So kind of give a little bit of your story and then tell what happened.
Yeah, sure. So like Dan would mention, I grew up in Hawaii. So from the time I was born till I was 25, born and raised in Honolulu, Hawaii. And I used to watch Bill Dance and Roland Martin with my dad on the weekends, on Saturday and Sunday. And then there was another local fisherman named Mike Sakamoto that I'd watch that would do like local fishing. And I'd always flip through the Bass Pro Shop catalog and whatnot. And I grew up fishing for peacock bass and largemouth because that's what we have in Hawaii. And I always thought it would be the coolest thing to be able to fish a tournament. And we didn't have that in Hawaii. Never existed. 2013, I moved out to California, and I looked around, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm in one of the best fisheries in the nation. So I started fishing all small little urban ponds. I kid you not. In like 2014, I was fishing urban ponds, learning what a Senko was, because when I used to bass fish when I was a kid, Gary Yamamoto still hasn't made the Senko yet. The chatterbait wasn't out. I was doing all these other different things. And so I was like, okay, I got a lot of stuff to pick up on. So 2015, I got my first boat, and I spent 4 years on the California Delta 3 years learning how to throw a chatterbait, learning how to punch, learning how to throw a frog. And I remember spending hours out there thinking to myself, I don't know what the hell I'm doing out here, spending all this time. But I know that if I put in my practice, that when I go and fish a tournament, I'm not just going to be donating my money. I wanted a fighting chance when I fished my very first tournament. So in 2018, I fished my very first tournament, and it was a club derby, and I got first place. And these guys have been fishing this lake for over 20 years. They're like, who the hell are you, and where the hell are you from? Because what are you doing here? And so they took me under their wing, and I learned a lot more things from them, because all you can learn from YouTube and seeing other things, but to learn from people that have been doing it for a really long time opened my eyes to a lot of different things. And they said, you should fish the Bass Nation. So I fished it 1 year as a co. I got my butt kicked because all my practicing that I was doing was power fishing. I wasn't implementing my finesse techniques, and I came in like second to last. I told myself I don't want that to happen again, and so I said, you know what? Next year I'm going to fish it from the front of my own boat, which was an old 1990 364 Ranger with a barely working Yamaha 150 and one graph on it, a black and white graph. And I ended up getting second in my first qualifier. I caught an 8-pounder on a spotted bass lake on a mag draft. And then the second one, I ended up getting fourth. Qualified me for the regional championship on Lake Havasu, where I weighed in that 18-pound bag on a glide bait. And then that qualified me for the nationals, which then I fished on Lake Ouachita River in Louisiana, burning a balsa crankbait and throwing a spinnerbait. So, and now I'm sitting in front of you with a Elite Pro jersey on, and I have to pinch myself because I had a successful photography business in Los Angeles. I made 6 figures, and I had this opportunity. I never thought that I would even remotely come close to doing good in the nationals. My old goal was making it to the nationals and that not coming in dead last. And so when I had a shot at winning, and the day that I get chills thinking about it. And when it happened, I remember my girlfriend called me, and she's just like, okay, so you don't have to make any decisions right away. And I'm like, no, babe, I made it. No, the decision's been made. I'm doing it. I closed my business down in Los Angeles. I sold everything that I had, except for what I can fit in a truck and a boat, and I've been on the road ever since. So, is this a dream life? Yes, on certain sides. It's to meet all of you guys, to be able to be up here with all these phenomenal anglers is more than a dream, and it's an honor, and I'm extremely humbled by it. But is this something that I want to do forever? I like having, I love being able to go home to a place that I can rest my head on a bed that's mine. I love being able to have my friends and family around. I don't have any of that on the road right now. And so having new friends, meeting a bunch of new people has been really encouraging for me to keep kind of going and fighting along. But like, do I want to do this for the next 10 years? Probably not. But this is just an opportunity that I told myself that if I ever passed up, if I ever said no to this opportunity, I would not live it down for a second. I would regret it every single second. So I said, you know what, screw it, I'm going to go for it. So, yeah.
And the girlfriend's still there.
Yeah, and the girlfriend's still sticking around, and she'll be coming out to Sabine River. So, yeah, we're just hanging in there.
So Will's a little bit of a different story. Will grew up in this business. His dad's a very accomplished bait maker. Davis Bait Company. We sell it up there. He's fished around here. In fact, his dad is the designer and the trademarker of the shaky head. So if you've heard of Davis Bait Company, that's Will Davis Sr., this is Will Davis Jr. So he's kind of been in this. This is something he's known. But when did you make that decision? Was it the goal, or was it, I just won the national championship and now I got to make a decision? How did it work out?
It's a little bit of all that. You know, I grew up fishing around here on the Coosa River and Lake Martin. I was that young man sitting right there, you know, many years ago. I'm 30 now. And if you ever want to do something in life, just pray about it and put your heart and soul into it. You can definitely be where we're at. And I'm a prime example, and I never thought I'd be here. I'm very thankful for that. So my dad owns Davis Bait Company. We're in Sylacauga. And he introduced me to the sport, you know, when I could walk. We started fishing and all that stuff. And, you know, started fishing tournaments when I was around 8 years old, and just progressed from there. And I fished high school at Sylacauga High School, and won Angler of the Year in 2011, and went to Bethel University in Tennessee and fished for them for 3 years. And came back home and flipped burgers and worked at Davis Bait Company. And I fished the Opens in 2017 and was 2 spots out of making the Elite Series then. It just wasn't meant to be there. You know, God's got the timing for you. You can't rush it. And fast forward to 2021, I won the state championship on Lake Martin Federation, and that qualified me for the regional on Smith Lake. Went there and won that one, and that qualified me for the national championship on Lake Pickwick last year, and ended up winning that. And that qualified me for the Bassmaster Classic and the 2023 Elite Series. And my goal was, you know, I told my wife and my dad, you know, before I die, I want to fish the Bassmaster Classic just one time. I mean, that's the pinnacle of the sport, and nobody can ever take that away from you. And let me tell you something, the experience that an angler gets to go through at the Classic, there's nothing else better than besides having, you know, getting married and having a baby. That's the top 3 things for sure. But I'm with Maddie on that. You know, it's a hard life. You know, and I talked to Marvin Endez the other day. I stayed with him at
The old dude?
Yeah, the old dude. I call him the old dude.
I got to interrupt you. He was supposed to come to dinner one night. My wife and I travel on the Elite Series, and we spend time in the campgrounds with people. He was supposed to come to dinner with some friends of ours, and he picked up the phone and he goes, I don't know if I can leave. These guys are old. They're in bed already. It was like 7:30, and he's just getting back. So Mark called me later, said, I'm not old. Screw you, and hung up. But
yeah, it was a good time. Yeah, they went to bed early, which was it was good for me to see that because I got in bed a little bit earlier, you know, than staying with somebody else. But he told me, he said, you know, this sport is great, but it robs you as far as like spending time with your family throughout your whole career. So that's the only downfall of the whole deal. But besides that, there's not a greater sport in this United States.
Greg and I share something in common, that we were both college baseball players. Greg, you were a pitcher, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, he was a right-handed pitcher, which is the best pitcher to be. Left-handers, their hats are a little bit crooked. I had to catch them all the time, not him, but anyway.
I don't know where you're going with that one, but I'm afraid I.
Left-handers are a little crooked, that's all.
I'll agree.
So, being an athlete in college, how did that help you develop as a pro angler, as a competitive angler, and then when did you make the decision to go pro, and what was that process for you?
I'm probably one of the older ones up here now. It's hard to believe because I'll show my age a little bit, but I remember fishing with Little Will. He was about 14, and I think we were on Logan Martin, and Little Will could catch him back then when he was 14. I was blown away. So he didn't know that he was going to make it, but I had a feeling he was going to make it, and he's made it. So I'm proud of him, and he's just going to keep getting better. Coming up in school, we didn't have the junior fishing stuff. We didn't have the high school fishing, certainly not college fishing, any of that stuff. My dad was a club angler, die-hard club angler. He made the state team one time. That was the pinnacle of his career. Otherwise, he was a high school teacher, his whole life. And but I played ball sports, and then I loved to fish. I grew up on Lake Martin. I had no clue how blessed I was to be able to walk down there and fish around the bank all the time and all summer long. I just tried to catch anything I could catch. But long story short, as I got older, I got into playing sports. I played football as quarterback, Benjamin Russell High School, and also played baseball. I ended up playing baseball at Auburn University Montgomery. And I got to the end of that, and all along I played ball with some guys that were outdoors, people like me. A couple of them don't live too far from here now. And we were just ate up with it. So every waking moment we were, fishing and hunting and stuff like that. So it always was inside me. But when I got out of playing ball, I've been doing it since I was that tall, playing competitive sports. And I still had that desire to compete at something. So I went from that to a state job. I had a good state job. I was working for Department of Environmental Management, spent a lot of time on the rivers and reservoirs over a 6-year period sampling these lakes around here. It's a pretty cool job, pretty stable job. Had insurance, had benefits, knew what I was going to get paid every month. And but yeah, I had that desire to compete. I was always been driven to see how good I could do, if I could learn something new. And so that passion for fishing and having a chance to fish a tournament. Yeah, I got into the club, the same club that I used to when I was 5 years old. I'd sit in the back in this little bitty room out in the country down there near Tallahassee, Alabama. About 5 years old, I'd sit back there and I'd do my homework while they did the club meeting and pairings and stuff like that. And when I got old enough, I joined that club. My dad was still in it, and I won it my first year in the club. And my boat stayed broke down half of that year, which is probably a blessing in disguise because I got a chance to fish with these guys that had been fishing lakes around the house for years. A lot of them were older guys, but they knew the lakes, they knew the fish around there. And it forced me to sit in the back of the boat and watch them and learn those places and those patterns. And but having that drive to compete is what helped me get through some tough times. I struggled. Man, I started fishing Lake Jordan. I didn't have a clue. My dad knew Lake Martin real well, not Lake Jordan. But I was living in Montgomery, so I started fishing tournaments around Jordan and the river. And let me tell you, I got my tail kicked for about 3 or 4 years straight. I'm like, I don't know, man, but I had that drive, that competitive drive. And every time I'd get my tail kicked, I'd go back and try to figure out what I did wrong, what they did right, what I knew. I had a big, long Excel spreadsheet. Every Monday morning when I'd come into work, now I can say this because I'm not working with state anymore, I'd update my fishing log on my Excel spreadsheet, and I had about 6 years worth of fishing trips on that spreadsheet, and it's still logged away. But I got a chance to make the state team, and ended up making the Federation National Championship, and which was a really cool thing. I got my first sponsor right after that, and I decided to fish a BFL, and I didn't have much money. I mean, I didn't come up, my parents didn't have a lot of money, so it all started from scratch when I got out of college, literally. And I decided to fish one BFL because it was on Lake Martin. I fished it the 2 years prior in the back of the boat, and I'd caught one fish in each of those tournaments out of the back. I said, I can't do any worse than that. So I signed up as a boater, and I went out there and I blew that tournament out. 200 boats, some of the best fishermen in the area, and I blew the tournament away, and I think I won $5,000 or $6,000. I was like, I don't know what I'm gonna do with all this money, but I knew one thing is I was going to be able to fish the next 2 BFLs that year, and I signed up for them, and I did pretty good, and I did good enough that it showed me that I could compete. Well, being a competitor like that, I'm at, like, what's the next step? Back then, Stren Series, now it's Toyota Series, jumped into that, jumped into some opens, qualified for FLW Tour. First year I got to fish the full opens, I qualified for the Bassmaster Elite Series. I don't know how we're going to do it, but we're going to try. My wife convinced me to do that. She probably regrets it now. But through all of that, I took a leave of absence from the state. I was really blessed that I had supervisors that allowed me to do that. And I knew that was my window. You know, probably each one of us, you know, it sounds like you all have that window of opportunity where you have to recognize this is my chance, you know, and I don't want to look back. And I took that leave of absence, fortunately, and I was like, I don't know if it's going to be a year or 2 years, but I'll know that I gave it a shot. And the rest of my career has sort of been that attitude is, you know, I don't know if I'm going to get next year. You know, things are better now than they were when I started. But it's been 16 years worth of that, of thank God, you know, for another year of getting to do something that I absolutely love, passionate about. And every time I get on the water, even when I'm not in a tournament, I still feel like that kid that was that tall walking around the bank at Lake Martin. That's the feeling that I get. So I know I'm in the right place, and I just feel blessed by God to have that opportunity.
Questions, anybody? Right now? No,
Bring it
sit
on.
there.
Bring it on. We'll sign it when we talk.
That's fine. Any
I
other
know
questions?
there's more questions. Somebody's thinking. There we go.
There we go.
There
What's
go.
up? The young lady asked, what's your favorite type of bass to catch? Greg, you got it. Since you were talking, let's keep it going. We'll work it reverse this time.
I'd probably get in trouble if I said smallmouth around here, wouldn't I? I love Akusa spotted bass. They're one of the meanest and strongest fish that swims, and I honestly think they'll whoop a smallmouth if you tied them tail to tail. But a smallmouth is crazy. And I don't like catching them. I don't like catching smallmouth in tournaments, but I love catching them in practice because they go crazy, man. They jump and dive and they're fast, and they'll give you a heart attack in a tournament. But that's an exciting fish to catch.
Will?
You know, I've caught, I don't know, a couple spotted bass in my life around
Just a
here.
few.
And at the national championship at Pickwick, I caught a 5.5 smallmouth, which is a big one, but they've got 7-8 pounders up there.
I was there. I
giants.
watched the whole thing.
And I've never had a fish fight so hard than that. They've just got big, broad tails, and they're just mean in that current. You know where a spotted bass got a forked tail like a strike, and they swim. I'm pretty sure they swim faster, but pound for pound, a big smallmouth and that lives in Pickwick is probably the strongest and most funnest bass I've ever caught, by far.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. I think Will watched me get into the tail race, and he went back there, and I watched him pull down. He sets the hook on this fish. He's horsing it to the boat like it's a drum. I was like, "Bud, I'm not sure if you should." Jumps out of the water, and he's like, I was like 50 yards away from him. I can see his eyes, and he's not half Chinese like I am. And this sucker, man, when he gets the fish in the boat, dude, he starts. I cheered him on because I was in no place to be, like, you know, or like when it comes to catching fish, I had like a couple, but he had a shot, and it was really cool to like literally be there. It was just me and him up there, and to watch that go down. But that being said, smallmouth, I would say for sure. When I was 14, I almost held the state record in Hawaii for the biggest smallmouth, which was 4.5, and I got like a 4 1/3. And so that always got me hooked into them. Yeah, I almost did. I mean, now I can say that I'm an elite angler, so I'm a professional now, so I don't have to almost hold the pro title. But when I was 14, I was stoked to say, man, I almost had the state record, you know. And so I would say smallmouth. They're I wouldn't say they're super intelligent because no bass is really intelligent, but they're a lot of fun to catch. You can do it on numerous different techniques. You can go finesse, and you can also go big baits for them, and they fight like crazy. And they're all over the country and all over the world too. So they're a lot of fun.
John, what about you?
I'm going to be the odd man out and agree with Greg on part of his. I prefer largemouth in a tournament, but the smallmouth in practice are a lot of fun. But being an older fisherman, my heart can't handle the smallmouth. They're crazy. Like they said.
Pat, what about you?
Well, being from Wisconsin, which is, you know, in my opinion, one of the meccas for smallmouth fishing, we got some of the best smallmouth water in the world with Sturgeon Bay and a lot of other ones you've never heard of. So definitely a smallmouth for me, definitely.
I grew up fishing the spotted bass. They're called Alabama bass in California, and I love catching spotted bass. Of course, you take the genetics of the fish out of this river. They were taken from Smith Lake and planted in California, and you put kokanee and trout in there, and they got 9 and 10-pound spotted bass there. And I've seen 11s that didn't qualify because they were weighed on scales that weren't anchored to the ground to be the world record. I love catching spotted bass. We got a question from the internet. Michael brought me this note. Pat, what's the funniest thing? Well, everybody can tell the story. What's the funniest thing to happen to you in a tournament?
Ooh, there's a lot of them, but I had one. It was not funny at the time, but after the fact, I can laugh about it. So we were on Cherokee for it would have been the third Open of 2020 when I was trying to qualify. And there was these little like rock ponds that you had to like really snake your way into to get into them. And I got in there fine, and I got a limit out of there, which was huge. I mean, like it was really hard to catch fish in that tournament. And I was about 20 miles from takeoff, and I had a co-angler with me, and I tried getting out, and we got hung up on the rocks bad. And bass rules, you can't like push yourself into an area, but you can push yourself out. So I was in my underwear with my shoes on because I was scared of what was on the bottom, and we both were trying to get out of there, and we couldn't push it off there. So eventually, I had to just trim the motor down because I was in second in points going into that. So, and at that point, I had not won the nation tournament. So I like saw my whole season spiraling downhill. So anyhow, I just told him, get in the boat, put your life jacket on, and I just pinned it and popped off the rock and drove 20-some miles back to weigh in my underwear and checked in my underwear. But I made it. And I ended up getting, I think, like 12th in the tournament or whatever. So
I can only imagine what that official was looking at.
Oh, yeah. Well, right before I checked in, I stopped and like put my pants back on. But yeah, I didn't know. I mean, and before that, my hot foot, the spring had broke. And so, like, for whatever reason, I could only run like 55 miles an hour. It was a train wreck, but looking back on it, if someone had been looking at that happening from the bank, I don't know what they would have been thinking, but we made her back.
So I guess the moral of that story is fish naked, qualify for the Elite Series. John, what about you?
So first off, the question is kind of slanted because if it happens in a tournament, it usually costs us money. So it's really not funny at the time. But I'd say I've had to get in the water to put the power poles up. I've had to get in the water and push the boat off. But probably the funniest is when your inflatable life jacket goes off. And then you have to wear that the rest of the day with it exploded around your neck because I'm kind of a heavier guy. So, they don't fit real well when they're inflated. So it's kind of like trying to choke you out the whole day. But you have to have it when you're driving the boat. So that would be it.
Maddie?
Okay, so this was my first year as a co-angler for the Bass Nation in California. We were fishing a place that was near and dear to me, which was the California Delta. I'd spent a lot of time on it. I felt comfortable. Blast off, day 2. I had 14 pounds for 3 fish. So I was sitting in a good place for the event on the coast side. This guy on takeoff, we're sitting in such a spot, we get swamped by all the other boats that are taking off. So I'm already, I'm in shin deep of water, and the guy takes off, and we start going. Without probably 30 seconds in, his alarm starts going off. Beep! I'm looking over him. He's still pinning it, just going down the lake. And his name is Jim. And I'm like, Jim, you hear that? He's like, what? Like, really sweet old man. Really sweet old man. The guy's like 78 years old. And he's just like, what? I'm like, your alarm's going off, bud. He's just like, wasn't doing that yesterday. I'm like, well, bud, it's doing it right now. And he's like, we're going to Sycamore. And I'm like, that's 8 miles. Like, that's a far run. We make it all the way to Sycamore, and his Mercury goes into Guardian mode. And so I help troubleshoot with his son was a Merc mechanic. We take the cowling off. I'm troubleshooting the entire time because he can't get back there and reach into certain things. I drain out the carb. I do all this stuff that on the phone with his son while the whole time the tide switch is happening. So if anyone's fished a tidal fishery, that's when the bite's going down. And so I'm watching the water start move, and we're stuck completely. And I'm like, wow, there's nothing I can do. We get the cowling back on. He catches a limit miraculously. I don't know how he did. And then we start idling back. I don't have a fish. It takes us 2.5 hours to get back idling, and I took a nap. I literally took a nap. And the first 5 minutes on the idle back, I stood on the back deck with my vest on and winged a whopper plopper, and I was praying to God for some really stupid 6-pounder to eat it, but never did. And so I just put my hat down and I took a nap for 2 hours. And so looking back on it, that was the tournament that made me decide, you know what? I don't want to be in a position where I am completely knocked out of a tournament because of someone else's error. If that's going to happen, I want it to be my fault. And so I'm kind of grateful for that scenario because it forced me into doing it as a boater next year, and here I am now. But
Greg, what about you? What's the funniest thing that's happened to you during a tournament?
I don't know. I'm sure I can think of better ones, but I have a short memory, so I'm gonna think of the most recent one. We had a Major League Fishing event on where were we? I forgot where we were fishing. One of the more recent events, I had a guy in the boat. We jumped over to Cherokee. We'd been on Douglas. We jumped over to Cherokee, and I started fishing. I got pretty hot that morning. I think first period I was leading, but I didn't have a lot overall. And we get the call, camera guy's coming, and I get one of the bigger guys with me, which is cool. And I'll give it away here. His nickname was Rocco. And I was like, all right, cool. What's up, Rocco? He was a cool dude, man. And, I'm fishing, and I'm on live scope, in our boats and live scope. And, you're really trying to focus the fish route suspended. So trying to, move slow, keep them dialed in. They're suspended over 74 feet of water. They're sitting in 10, suspended over 74. So you had to keep them. And Rocco I know why they call him Rocco, because he's constantly moving on my boat. And we're moving around and stuff like that, and I'm losing the fish and my bait and all that. And so anyway, we make a move. I don't catch a whole lot, for a little bit. I'm starting to drop a little bit, and I'm like, man, I got to make a move. I had this one place where I caught, my biggest fish so far, and I saw some more on live scope. I need to go try to get one of these 3-pounders, and make a little run to get to them. And I pull up there, and I look out there on live scope, and I see one suspended, and I fire that little jerkbait over his head, and start snapping it, and bam, he jumps it. I mean, he smokes it. And I'm like, there he is, It's just the same place where I caught my biggest one already, and I'm fighting the fish, and it's dogging it, man. I got it on a little light Halo Scott Canterbury cranking rod. I think we got one up there. And he's dogging it, I'm just letting him strip drag, smallmouth, I think. And he keeps digging, and he gets under the boat, and I'm trying to look to see, what he is, how big he is, and I need a key fish right there. And I'm like, man, I can't see. He's under the boat, and and all of a sudden, I feel my boat just, start. I'm like looking for the fish. I'm dialed in, man, because I need this key fish, and the boat's just, rocking around. And I turn and I look, and it's like so slow motion. Rocco has lost his. I think he was trying to get a shot of that fish, as it came out from under the boat, and he's like going like in slow motion, falling backwards. He's completely lost all balance. And these cameras these guys use are like $150,000, $200,000 cameras. These guys are, and I have the utmost respect that they can stay on us for 8 hours doing that. But Rocco's losing it. Like, he's going, and I'm focused. I got to catch this fish. And man, he's going, and like he bumps the motor. I'm like, all right, he'll catch himself there, and he just keeps going, man. I'm like, he's going in the lake, and I see him trying to save the camera, and he kind of tosses the camera up on the deck. That's what they do, so they don't lose the camera. They'll go in, but they'll toss the camera up on the boat. And all of a sudden, Rocco gets stuck between the power pole and the cowling on my 250 Pro XS. And when I say he's stuck, he is stuck, y'all. Like I'm still fighting the fish. I can't lose my, Rocco is stuck back
Stay
there.
focused, athletes.
He's
stay
like,
focused.
oh, you know, I'm like, is he gonna live? Like, he didn't go in, but he's in there. And I had an ex-military, a veteran boat official. Well, boat officials, man, when you got a fish, like they know they got to be ready to go. Camera guy, he's just along for the ride. And so my boat official, like, it's like Rocco's not even back there. Like, he's got that scale, like, he's ready to go, you know. He's like, Rocco's like, help me. And my old guy, like, he's a retired guy. He just sits there like he didn't say a word. He's like, man, later on, he's like, man, I was going to be ready to weigh that fish. We'll worry about him later. And finally, my boat official gets up because I'm still tied up with this fish. It finally comes out. It ends up being about a 6-pound striper. So it wasn't a smallmouth we thought. So that was kind of a bummer. Rocco's stuck between the power pole and the cowling. And the guy, I'm a big dude. I'm 6'3". The guy, my boat official's my size. He gets Rocco, and he leans and gives everything he's got, and he doesn't budge. That's how stuck he was. After a little bit, he gives him an even better pull, and he unwedges him. And he was probably bruised up a little bit, and I would love to see that footage because I know the guys back at the station or whatever were giving him a hard time. But yeah, that was the most recent one. Rocco stuck between a mercury and a hard place, I guess.
Did you ever just think of hitting the down button?
I told somebody like that after a while. I told somebody, man, if I could have thought to hit that power pole, that would have been so good. But I was dialed in on that fish, man. I wasn't thinking about him, really.
Little Will, I know you're like 12 years old, but you've got to have some funny stuff. I mean, you fish with your dad for all.
He's usually got all the sandwiches eat by about 8 o'clock in the morning, you know. But,
And then he goes and makes some wings on the back deck,
That's right. I got 2 of them. They're real quick. But me and my wife first started dating. I took her to Lay Lake. We fished a Friday nighter out of Paradise, and it was like a 7-1 or something like that. So Sunset Marina, if y'all been on Lay Lake, they put new condos and stuff up there. Well, they used to have them Tuesday nighters out there. Well, them fish would just load up on them docks, I was like, we're going to go in there and flip them docks, about 11 o'clock and catch them. Well, we pull in there, and I'm flipping. I catch a decent one. And next thing I know, man, she is asleep, like back there with her mouth wide open. And there was a bat flying around the boat. And that bat come by and actually slapped her on the side of the face. She said, why are you messing with me? I said, you better close your mouth. You're going to swallow that bat here in a second, Has any of y'all ever been to the Alabama River up, like, towards Jordan Dam? All right, so there's a big, like a waterfall type deal that you got to go up, and it's called Moccasin Gap. And it's very sketchy and very dangerous. With that being said, me and my dad was fishing ABT back in 2015, and we had a tunnel hole with a 60-horse Yamaha. So we made it in practice. There wasn't near as much water, or there was a lot of water on when we was up there, and we made it up the slope pretty easy. Well, they didn't have near as much water on during the tournament, and we're going up through there, and then when we hit it, I was driving, and I had it wide open. We was going up that thing, and if y'all ever watched that movie, The Perfect Storm, when they going up, come on, that's what I was saying, because it was, and it was going like 2 inches at a time. But yeah, that was pretty funny and scary at the same time.
Well, I'm going to wrap it up with my funny story from the water. It's not a tournament. We'll get to the raffle here in just a minute. Thank you guys for being so open and friendly with us. But growing up in California, I used to catch pitching lessons to save money for school time and to buy fishing tackle. And the lure that everybody wanted to have was a Rico. It's a topwater bait. In 1997 actually 93, 94, to spend $25 on a topwater bait was almost could choke you. But I saved for it and I bought one. I ended up doing an article with Lobina Lures, the manufacturer of it, a topwater article with John Murray. And for doing that article, they sent me baits for pictures. I got 3. Including the Rio Rico, which is the larger size. So I'm out fishing with my wife on a Wednesday evening on Folsom Lake, tons of water willow, and the fish are blowing up. I caught a 5-pounder over the top of a willow tree, and I gave her the Rio Rico. Now, mind you, I've got a $25 lure, she's got a $28 lure, and she doesn't want to be throwing it because she's afraid of it. I'm like, it was free. and she could throw. The girl could throw a casting reel. She still can. And she's trying to make a cast as I've made one and got hung up. So I step on the trolling motor to move forward, and she hangs my $30 Rio Rico about 8 feet up in a tree. I go get mine, I come back to hers, and I'm trying to pull this thing out of the tree. Long story short, I broke a rod. Every time I try to pull on the branch to get the bait out, the boat's going under the water, so I'm stepping on the trolling motor on reverse, pulling it, and next thing you know, the whole half of the willow tree goes boom across the whole boat between us. And she looked at me like, what? I said, get the bait and roll the tree over. It's called a structure relocation program. And we took off. So that's my funny story on the water. My wife got to take part of it. It was kind of funny. Anyway, folks, thank you so much. Please thank these guys. Get their autographs, pictures with them. We'll have another seminar here in about an hour with Bass B. But we're going to pull these up. We're going to do a little bit of our raffle prizes. The main raffle is going to be after this next seminar with John Cruz and Matt Herron and all those guys. But come say thanks to these guys, and we'll get this raffle stuff started. We'll give a few prizes away here momentarily.
All right, guys, I'm going to shut this feed off, and we'll be back with you in just about an hour for our last seminar. So be sure to jump back on with us. Hope you're learning a few things, certainly some good stories out of that one. Certainly plenty of time if you are in the area and still can make it down here for Fish Fest. Love to have you. But, guys, we'll see you in just a little bit. Got some